Well, here we go again.
Hi,
Gonna
everybody.
continue on our study in Genesis.
Yeah.
Happy February to everybody. Today's
Yeah.
February 2nd. We're already into the second month of the year.
Yeah.
And moving right along in our study here in Genesis. We're going to try tonight or today to cover Genesis 16 through 19. Those 4 chapters. We said, I think I told you 15, but we covered 15 last week. So we're going to start in 16 this week.
Hagar
And And to start off, and as we've mentioned several times, we're not going to read this all word for word because it take a long time to go through the whole book of Genesis, going verse by verse. But we want to hit some of the high points, and if you want to do further study, there's a lot of good commentaries out there that you can get and read. But I just want to kind of hit some high points and things that I hope will help you in your walk with the Lord. But it starts off with chapter 16. It says, now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, which we knew this, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar.
Yeah.
So she said to Abram, God still hadn't renamed Abram yet. It says, the Lord's kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. God's already promised him. What was his promise? They're going to have a child.
Have a son
through Sarah.
Yeah.
But Sarah gets impatient. Have you ever gotten impatient and tried to help God out?
Oh.
You pray about something and it doesn't seem like God answers right away, so you take matters into your own hands. As humans, we can do a lot of things in our own strength. Oh. We can make things happen. We can force things to happen sometimes, but a lot of times those things don't work out so good. And that kind of happens here. Yeah. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we go along, but Sarah tells Abraham, or Abram, as he called it this time, why don't you sleep with my servant, with my maid, and have a child with her.
And in those days, that was permissible.
Well, I don't know if it's permissible, but they did it. I'll put it that way.
It was before the Ten Commandments.
Abraham goes along with it. I don't know. Maybe he thought, that sounds like a good deal to me. I don't know. But anyway, he goes along with it, and certainly, they had a child going through, and Hagar did conceive. But as we said, things didn't work out all that good. Because first of all, when Hagar found out she was pregnant, she began to despise Sarah. Because in those days it was considered, rather, I don't know what's the word to use, rather disgraceful. No, not disgraceful. That's not the right word, but it was, women were looked down upon when they couldn't have children. Let's put it that way. To them, their importance came through having children. Yeah. And to not have children was a very devastating thing. And so here's Hagar. She gets pregnant. Well, Sarah hadn't been able to get pregnant, so she starts making fun of her, starts treating her with contempt. And what does Sarah do? She goes to Abraham and she says, verse 5, Sarah said to Abram, you're responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. So whose idea was this in the first place?
It was hers.
It was Sarah's idea.
Yes,
and now she's getting mad at Abram because her maid is treating her with contempt.
Yeah.
And Abram says, she's your servant. You do with as you want. So what does Sarah do? She retaliates.
She does.
She starts treating Hagar harshly. And so you see how things get so messed up when we start trying to do things our own way. And Hagar is despising Sarah, and now Sarah's treating Hagar with contempt. In fact, she treated her so harshly that finally she ran away. She ran away. Well, on the way, God tells her or sends an angel to her and tells her to go back home. He says, I'm going to make a great nation out of your son. Sometimes we have to put up with difficult situations to see God's best in our life, to see God do what he wants to accomplish in our life. And so he told Hagar, listen, I know Sarah's mistreating you, but look, if you'll go back and you'll take that, so
God will make everything right.
God, he said, I'll work it out.
Yeah.
You're probably going to have to suffer some more under Sarah. She's not going to be treating you real nice, but in life we go through difficult things.
Yeah, we do.
And what's our response? Do we stand up to it and continue to do what God tells us to do, or do we run away? I think all of us go through situations, even
we
being
run from our problems.
Yeah, even being in ministry, there's times when, situations have gotten bad and, these thoughts have come to me, maybe I just ought to leave, go do something else. But I know that what God's called me to do, and I know I'm right where God told me to be. Yeah. And I'm not going to let people run me off. I'm not going to let situations run me off. I'm going to stay where I'm at until God tells me to go.
Yes.
Well, Sarah started off doing things the wrong way by trying to get, a son through her maid instead of waiting for God to do it through her. Yeah. Then Hagar, because she was pregnant, Hagar starts acting with contempt towards Sarah. Sarah gets mad at that, so she starts treating Hagar harshly. Hagar runs off, and what a mess that we can make when we try to do things our own way. And then, truthfully, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but if you know the rest of the story, Hagar has a son called Ishmael. And according to all historians, Ishmael is the father of the Arab nations, yes. And of course, there's conflict later on when Sarah does have a son, Isaac. There's conflict between Isaac and Ishmael. Well, guess what? A few thousand years later, there's still conflict between Ishmael and Isaac, between the Jewish nation and the Arab nations. And so, and this all started way back several thousand years ago. How? By Sarah getting impatient, wanting to do things her way, or wanting to do things what she thought was the easy way. Yeah. But you know what? The easiest way to do things is God's way. That's right, not our way. When we try to do things our way, it just it usually winds up being a mess, and that's exactly what happened here. It created a mess that's still going on today. Still seeing the results of this situation. So that takes us on into chapter 17, and God again confirms his covenant with Abram. In fact, at this time is when he changed his name from Abram to Abraham. Yeah. Abram, from what I was able to find out here, means exalted father, where Abraham means father of multitudes or father of nations. And again, he tells him that even though so far they haven't had a child through Sarah, that he's going to have a multitude of offsprings, and even there'll be many, out of him will come many nations and kings. And
God calls Sarah the mother of many nations.
Yeah, he calls her, changes her name too, which we'll get into, but she also becomes a mother of many nations. Yeah. It was interesting down in verse 7, I believe it is. Verse 7, verse 8 actually. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and to your descendants after you, and I will be their God.
Yes.
God made a covenant. He said, this is an everlasting covenant.
Yeah.
And he gave them, in addition to the fact that he said, you're going to be a father of many nations, he also said, I'm giving you this land of Canaan, this land that you're living in now that you don't own a square foot of. I'm going to give it to that as an everlasting possession.
Yeah.
Now, I know there's a lot of feelings about that today, whether or not the Israelites, the Jewish nation, has a right to that land, but God said, I'm making this an everlasting covenant. Now, true, they did let their land, in essence, be stolen away from them because of their disobedience, because of not listening to God, but does that mean that it's not their land? What if you disobey God and because of that you lose some of his blessings? Does that mean those blessings are gone forever because you disobeyed God, made a mistake?
Because when God makes a promise, it's done. And
all you have to do is repent and get back under God's grace, and those blessings are still there. Just because the devil steals something from you doesn't mean it's gone for good.
I've got a question.
Sure.
What is an everlasting covenant?
It means a covenant that lasts forever. It doesn't cease to be.
So what is a covenant?
It's just an agreement between two people. In this case, it's a covenant between Abraham and God.
Okay, it's an agreement.
It's an agreement, yes.
All right.
It's just an agreement that
Like
God
a
made.
marriage agreement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Marriage is a
Gotta get
covenant.
all straight.
It's an agreement between two people.
Okay.
And it's supposed to be an everlasting covenant. Unfortunately, it doesn't always turn out that way, but it's that's just the way it is. And the Israelites didn't always keep up their end of it. But when God says it's everlasting as far as God's concerned. You know, again, you can lose some of the blessings because of sin, because of disobedience to God, just as the Israelites did. They lost their land for a number of years, but as far as God was concerned, that covenant is still in effect.
Yeah.
That covenant that he made with Abraham, he says, I give you this land. And who has more right to give that land than
God?
Than the one that created it?
That's right.
And so, to me, that gives them that right to that land. Just because, like say, because they lost it for a period of years doesn't mean that it's gone forever.
Uh-huh.
And then God goes on and tells Abraham, he says, I'm going to give you a sign of this covenant. And he said that sign is to be circumcision, a cutting away of your flesh. He says that this is something for you and for all, for the generations after you. It's a sign of the covenant. It wasn't the circumcision itself that made the covenant valid. It was the fact God said this is an everlasting covenant. But the circumcision was just a sign of that covenant. This was to remind them. God had already declared Abraham righteous by his faith, by his believing God. So it wasn't circumcision that made him righteous. It was just a symbol, you might say, of their faith. As James talks about this, showing your faith by works. Well, they showed their faith by circumcision, that they were part of that covenant that God had made with them. And
this was a serious thing, Joe, because it says here, any uncircumcised man who has not both been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant.
Yeah.
So
but
that's
God,
a serious thing.
It's very serious. God said, this is a sign that you have agreed to my covenant.
Yeah.
It's just like failure to sign a contract. You can have negotiations between two people or two businesses, and they decide, okay, this is how we're going to do business. Here's the contract.
Yeah.
But you have to sign your name to that contract. You can draw up the contract, and one party can draw up the contract, and you can be in agreement with it. But if you don't sign it, it's not
It's not
valid.
valid.
Well, this was kind of like signing the covenant, signing up and saying, I'm in agreement with this covenant. And part of it, I believe, was the shedding of blood. That is like a blood covenant. So by the shedding of blood through the circumcision, this was a sealing. Not that it negated it on God's part, but it negated it on that person's part.
Okay.
You know, I just like the fact, you know, we say Jesus died for the sins of the world. We say, well, how come everybody's not saved? Because some people don't accept that.
That's right.
Some people don't believe that. Some people don't act on that.
Yeah.
You know, there's cures for certain diseases that can cure anybody in the world that has that disease, but there may still be people in the world dying from that disease. Why? Because they won't take the medicine.
Yeah.
And it's the same way here. The covenant, as far as God was concerned, it's valid. He's keeping his part of it, but if they weren't circumcised, it's like they were saying, we don't want to be a part of that covenant. We're going to do it our own way. And it says they were to be cut off from their people. It goes on now in the next few verses, verse 15, he tells Sarai, Abraham, as for Sarai your wife, she'll no longer be called Sarai, her name will be called Sarah. I'll bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I'll bless her so she'll be the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. Just again, reiterating what this covenant is that God has made. And what happens? Abraham laughs. He's still struggling with this.
Yeah.
He's 99 years old now, almost 100. And in fact, he says that, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Well, he's not quite 100, but he's pushing 100, and he knows that by the time they could have a child, they'll be at least 100. And will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? You can certainly understand their doubts, you might say. I mean, we're not quite that old yet, but I don't think we're going to be having any more kids.
I don't think so.
And so, you know, you can understand that Abraham's still having his doubts. But again, this shows us that your faith doesn't have to be perfect. You know, God understands when we have doubts, especially in situations like this when it seems so far-fetched. He's not excusing doubts, but that's something we go through sometimes, have those doubts. But we just have to continue to trust in God. Abraham here still tries to get God to bless Ishmael. I mean, this is his first son, so he still, you know, he has a special place in Abraham's heart.
Well, sure.
Maybe not so much to Sarah, but certainly to Abraham. This is his son. He says, you know, God, why don't you bless Ishmael? And God does tell him that he will bless Ishmael.
Yeah,
he says, verse 29, as for Ishmael, I've heard you. I will surely bless him. I'll make him fruitful, will greatly increase his numbers. He'll be the father of 12 rulers. I'll make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you this time next year. The covenant wasn't with Ishmael. The covenant was with Isaac. And he did bless Ishmael, which maybe wasn't such a good thing, because it's like, say, he's been causing Isaac trouble all these years, all these centuries and millennium. But anyway, Abraham is obedient. One thing we see right here, he's obedient to do what God tells him to do.
Yeah.
He told him to be, you know, to circumcise not only his family, but all his household, his bondservants and so forth. He did it that day. That's the best way to respond to God's word. When God tells you to do something, you know, do it right then.
Right then,
if it's, you know, if it's possible. Sometimes he tells you something that you have to do over a period of time, but this was something he told him, this is what you need to do. So he immediately doesn't put it off. He circumcises all. Abraham's 99 years old now. Ishmael is 13. And, this is a painful thing. Sometimes painful things we like to put off. Well, I really don't like doing that. I'll do that next week. Best thing is just do it right there and get it over with. Because it won't hurt any less next week, and you do it right now, by next week it'll all be over, But anyway, we need to be obedient, have that kind of readiness to obey God as soon as He tells us to do something. Chapter 18. 3 men, says, appear to Abraham. He looked up and saw 3 men standing by. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance to his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. Now, we're not told for sure exactly who these are, but the fact that Abraham bowed down and began, basically in worship to him, tells me that this was more than angels. A couple of them may have been angels. In fact, later on it says there were 2 angels, but I think the other one was a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. Revelation, when John bowed down to an angel, what did the angel tell him? Don't worship me. Get back up on your feet. I'm just an angel. I'm not God. And yet Abraham bowed down low to the ground in worship to these men. So I'm thinking one of them had to be an appearance of God. And again, before that, first thing he does is Abraham shows his hospitality. He offers to wash their feet, which was a common practice in those days when they walked with sandals to wash feet. It's part of hospitality. And then he offers to prepare them food.
Yeah.
And I thought, this shows how much more relaxed things were back in those days. Today, if we had unexpected guests, what would we do? You'd either call a restaurant and, order something, or you'd grab something out of the freezer and
you'd clean house and everything.
Abraham's microwave it. But Abraham, first he runs to Sarah and he says, quick, take some flour.
Yeah. And
it says 3 seahs, which according to what I read, that's like 36 pounds of flour. I think, boy, she's going to make a lot of bread.
A lot of bread.
And I don't know if this is unleavened or leavened bread. If it was leavened bread, that means that it's going to take several hours to fix this, to let the dough raise. But even unleavened bread, she's got to knead it, she's got to make it, she's got to bake it.
It's going to be like fluffy tortillas.
And then Abraham runs out to where the herd is and picks out a calf. And he says, prepare it. Well, they got to butcher it. They got to cut it up. They got to cook it. Skin it, cut it up. And you're talking quite a bit of time to fix this. This is not, like not like grabbing something out of the freezer and throwing it in the microwave or calling, Food Dash or what they call that anyway, have somebody deliver the food, going down to nearest pizza parlor and getting a couple of pizzas. This took several hours surely to make this meal. And anyway, after they've eaten and done all this and whatnot, then again he reiterated, or there's 3 of them, reiterate the promise. The promise, they're going to have a son by this time next year. Now it's getting close. By this time next year. This time it's Sarah that laughs. Sarah's in the tent, but she hears them. Apparently they're right outside the tent talking, and she hears them. It says that Sarah laughs. After I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure of having a son? I'm worn out. Abraham's old. He's almost 100. And again, this struggle with believing. When Sarah's called on this, one of the men that says, why did Sarah laugh? Why, she compounds her sin by lying. Oh, I didn't laugh. I wasn't laughing. We can't hide our sin from God. Adam and Eve tried to do that. They tried to hide in the bushes, and it didn't work. God knows what we've done, and we can't hide it from him. But then they go on and tell him that there's another purpose for this visit, other than just confirming the covenant, confirming the fact they're going to have a son. He said they say there's been a great outcry from these cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, which are on down the road a ways, and the outcry has been that things have gotten pretty raw, pretty nasty there.
Yeah.
And they're going to check it out and see if it's as bad as they say. Well, I don't think God has to come down in the flesh to see how bad things are. He knew how bad it was, but I'm thinking maybe he was going to give them one last chance to repent. Yeah. And they say, if it's as bad as we've heard, we're going to destroy them. We're going to wipe these two cities out. Abraham hears that, and of course he knows his nephew Lot is living in one of those cities in Sodom. And so he starts bargaining with these men. He says, well, what if there's 50 righteous people in there? Would you spare it? Well, God shows his grace. He said, yeah, I'd spare it for 50. And Abraham, he gets a little bolder. Well, what about 45? And he works his way on down. I was reading this. I thought maybe this sets a precedent for the nature of the Jews, because they have they had kind of a reputation of being bargainers, trying to get things cheaper or get things lower. Well, he kept going down and down until finally he settled on 10. He quit at 10. He didn't try to go any further. He finally said, well, how about if they're just 10 righteous people? And they say, all right, we'll spare it for the sake of 10. But unfortunately, when they got there, they couldn't even find 10.
No, they couldn't find even 10.
Yeah, and so in the chapter 19 tells the results. They went down there where he's living. Apparently, Lot's not totally corrupted, although as we go through there, we see that he's been influenced a lot by living in these wicked cities.
Well, sure.
And he offers hospitality to these men. Actually, this is where it says the two angels arrived at Sodom. In first verse of 19, back in 18, it said there was 3 men. So apparently one of them left. Maybe it was the pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus, because it calls these 2 men angels. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he sees them and he invites them in, and they say, "Oh no, we're gonna stay in the square tonight, and just in the city square." Well, Lot says, "No, you don't want to do that. You want to come to my house." Well, Lot probably knew what would happen to him if they stayed in the square, stayed out in the open in Sodom overnight, because, well, it becomes very obvious shortly after just how wicked this city has become, because these men come banging on Lot's door wanting these men, and it's very explicit here. It says that, they want them for sex.
They were sodomites.
Yeah, they were sodomites. They wanted these men for sex, and of course they're under Lot's roof, and there's a strong, I will say a strong moral code, you might say, that anybody that is a guest under your roof, you have to protect them. And Lot is even goes to the place of offering his daughters to them. And to me, this is an indication that Lot's kind of lost a lot in living in this wicked city. That he's kind of compromised quite a bit.
Yeah.
But the men, these 2 angels, they draw or pull Lot back into his house. They cause blindness to come on the people. They're outside there, so they can't even find the door to bust in. And they told them, listen, these cities are going to be destroyed. If you got any daughters, any son-in-laws, well, their daughters weren't married yet, but they have been apparently promised in marriage, because they had 2 potential son-in-laws. Well, Lot goes to them, and they just laugh at him
Yeah,
and think
they-
he's just joking, or he just doesn't know what he's talking about, and they won't come. And the next day, when these angels say it's time to go, even Lot's kind of hesitant. And finally, they had to grab him by the hand and drag him out. And even then, he argues over the destination. They say, go into the mountain. Oh, I can't go into the mountains. I need to go to this little city. Spare this little city over here. It's just a little city. I'll go there. I can't live in the mountains. Again, instead of just listening to God and doing what God told him to do, he argues with them. And finally, in this case, they give in and say, all right, you can go to this city, but you got to go now because this place is going to be destroyed, and don't look back.
Oh.
And of course, you're probably familiar with the story. The wife looks back.
Yeah.
But I don't think she was just looking back just to see what was going on. Now, if it was Lot, you know how guys are. They like explosions, and he might be looking, ooh, I've never seen a city blown up before. I'd like to see this, But I think the wife looked back with longing. It's like, oh, my beautiful city, all my shopping malls, all my nice restaurants, they're all going to be gone. I don't want to leave this. I think it was more than, just peering over her shoulder to see a big explosion. It was looking back with longing. And what Jesus say about looking back once you put your hand to the plow? Said you're not worthy of the kingdom of God. In other words, looking back with longing, looking back, thinking, oh man, I sure miss those wild parties we used to have. I sure miss that wild lifestyle we used to have, that sort of thing. Yeah, I sure miss all those luxuries I used to have, all those things that were so nice. God doesn't want us looking back with longing on the things of the past. Some of those things may have been more comfortable. Some of those things may have been more fun, but compared to what's ahead of us, they're nothing. They're nothing compared to what God had in store for these people. What was back there was nothing. In fact, it was nothing but garbage back there. But sometimes when you get used to living in garbage, you think garbage is pretty good. And somebody wants to take your garbage away. Well, I don't want to lose my garbage. That's true, though.
Okay.
But I believe God spares Lot because of his covenant with Abraham. That he made a covenant with Abraham, and Lot was part of Abraham's family.
Right.
Doesn't really appear that Lot is a real righteous man. But anyway, he wants to go to the city of Zoar because doesn't think he can live in the mountains. Well, things don't work out in Zoar, and pretty soon they wind up in the mountains. And there's that excuse me ends in chapter 19 with a kind of a story that
and Lot loses his wife.
Yeah, Lot lost his wife because she turned into a pillar of salt because of looking back with longing and wanting to go back. Now he's left with these two daughters, and the two daughters, again, they've apparently been corrupted by their influence in Sodom because their thought is, there's no men around here. It's just us and Dad, and how are we going to carry on our family? So they each in turn get Lot drunk, again showing Lot's corruption. Apparently it wasn't that hard to get him drunk. And they go in while he's drunk and have sex with him, and both of them get pregnant. And again, just shows the influence, I believe, that living in this wicked city had upon them. You can't live in that kind of stuff without it influencing you. Now, I know that there's stuff going on in the world all the time, but that doesn't mean we have to be close to it. Doesn't mean we have to partake of it. And apparently this had great influence on these two daughters, and and even Lot to allow himself to get that drunk.
And
That,
these daughters, their motive was that they would preserve the line of their father. So their motive was right, but their actions were wrong.
Yeah, I guess you might
They
say in
wanted
one
to
sense.
preserve the family line.
The family line, yeah. And
That didn't work out.
but
too
yeah,
good.
that didn't work out too good. The older
No.
daughter, this is right at the end of chapter 19, the older daughter had a son. She named him Moab. He's the father of the Moabites.
Moabites.
The younger daughter also had a son and named him
Ammon.
Ben-Ami, and he's the father of the Ammonites of today. Well, both the Ammonites and the Moabites were a thorn in the flesh to the Israelites
Yeah.
later on.
They were
So,
enemies of Israel.
so even that didn't work out
for
again.
generations.
When you try to do things your own way instead of depending on God, I believe Abraham would have accepted Lot back. He could have gone back and lived with Abraham.
Sure.
And they could have found, I'm sure they could have found husbands for these two daughters, but they decided to do it their own way. And it didn't work out all that great. And so, a couple of lessons we learned from this. One, when God establishes a covenant and calls it an everlasting covenant, it's everlasting.
It's a done deal.
God doesn't go back on it. We can mess it up and we can miss out on some of the blessing by failing to follow after God, but all we have to do is get our act together and repent and get back right with God, and that covenant's still there.
Yes.
And the other thing is, don't try to do it in your own strength or your own power. That doesn't ever work out. Oh, it may seem like it for a while. I mean, these girls may have thought, oh, that worked out good. We're both pregnant. We both got sons now. But years later, same with Ishmael. Oh, I got a son now. I got a son named Ishmael. But now, millenniums later, there's still that conflict between Ishmael and Isaac.
Yeah.
So it's a whole lot better to let God do it. Wait on God. Sometimes, we get in trouble when we get impatient. Saul learned that, when he was waiting for Samuel to come and make the offering before they went into battle, and Saul got impatient and thought, well, my men are going to leave, they're ready to go to battle. If we don't go, we can't go into battle till I make the offering, and if I don't do it soon, they're all going to leave. And so he makes the offering, and because of that, he was taken down as the king of Israel.
Yeah.
Because he got impatient. He took upon himself what was not his right to do.
Yeah.
And so, as Pastor Messer always used to say, God is never late. Sometimes he misses, a lot of times he misses chances to be early, but he's never late.
Never late.
And then sometimes we feel that way. God,
Yeah.
I'm tired of waiting. I don't want to wait any longer. I want to do something now, even if it's wrong. Well, unfortunately, a lot of times it is wrong. So we got to learn to be patient and wait on God. God will come through if we don't lose our faith and
That's right.
don't get impatient. God will see us through.
Yes, he will.
All right. Any other comments you got on these chapters?
No, you covered it.
All right. Well, we will go on. Let's see. Probably go through 20 to, 20, 21, 22, and 23. We'll do 4 chapters again. So 20 through 23 for next week, just so you can read ahead. We'll try and cover those 4 chapters. If you read ahead, why, that'll kind of give you some you'll be ready for it and know what we're talking about here. But
in the meantime, you're going to be doing the same lesson Wednesday night.
Yeah.
At the church.
Well, this will be broadcast on Wednesday night, but we also do it live on Wednesday night. So anytime you want to come and be with us live, and the advantage there is we get discussion. If you got questions, you can ask your questions. If you got comments, if you got insights on some of these things that you want to share, why, this is a good time to do it. So we do this at the in the church lobby on Wednesday nights, 7 to 8 o'clock.
Mhm.
Try to keep it down to 1 hour. If you're not familiar with the church, Imaginations Church, 2445 East 24th Street here in Yuma. You're always welcome, and we have some good discussions.
Yeah,
People come up with some good questions sometimes.
they do. Good input.
Unfortunately, I can't answer all of them, but we try. We do our best.
Yeah.
But anyway, we thank you for being with us, and we just hope you come back to join us again next week as
Have
we
a good
continue
week.
on with this study in the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. Some important things in here. God bless and take care.
Bless you all.
Well, my remote's not working.